just form a fucking wall.
O'Neal deep in the post, lots of contact there. Oh, what a block by Wallace! What a jump ball!
Pistons down 4, 12-8, 7:38 to play in the first. A burst from Rodney, stuck into the rim. Count that baby and a foul. Reggie inside for Andre and a dynamite dunk.
Pistons fans, welcome to another edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast. Brendan Johnson and Aaron Johnson here with you this week. Ryan Pay out for a work event, unable to be here this week. And you know what I'm going to do? I am going to take the professional road and not throw any shade at somebody who has to, miss the pod for a work commitment. Because I totally understand, and that's the right and professional thing to do, because we are all professional here on this podcast, Aaron.
Yeah, we are, Brendan. That's why I show up every week and fulfill my commitment and do this podcast.
Well, last week I just want to clarify, Aaron and Ryan threw me under the bus. I mean, seriously, it was dark, it was cold, and it was painful. And it was a work commitment last week. You could check my work schedule. So I just wanted to put that out there for all the people. But I think it's really just a testament, I think, to my importance level on this podcast, that they made such a big deal about my absence last week. And it's just, honestly, I really thought long and hard about it, and I was refreshed, I was rejoiced, I was rejuvenated to know, that my worth and my importance on this podcast was so high that they would make such a big deal about my absence. So I just want to say thank you, and I'm really excited to get into this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast.
Look, I take the time to burst your bubble now, but we got some pretty big Pistons stuff to talk about this week, so I'm more excited.
Well, you know what? Guess what? Here's
ready
the deal.
To get into that.
I'm going to be a free agent next summer anyways, so we'll see what happens.
We didn't give you an option to be a
that's
free
false.
agent. You're going to be an unrestricted
it's a player
free
option.
Agent, no team option, no podcast option. You're going to be unrestricted. And if you end up back here for the vet min, then you end up back here for the vet min.
Well, you'll be lucky to get a 10-day when your contract expires. You're still a young buck. You're like in baseball, like arbitration, whatever. Anyways, if you didn't catch my reference, Andre Drummond in a recent interview goes out and makes the exact statement, well, I'm going to be a free agent next summer. And everybody starts reacting. Oh my goodness, Andre Drummond says he's going to be a free agent. He's not coming back. He's leaving Detroit. Will he come back? Where will he sign? Etc. And he also references that it's going to be a big contract year for him because, well, quite frankly, next year's free agent class is not a marquee class. He is one of the big names in free agency, which means that teams with some money to spend are going to throw some money his way if he were to opt out of his player option. Now, Andre, after all of this, follows this up with saying that, next year he's going to have the option. It's just the process he was alluding to. That in no way is a statement saying he wants to leave Detroit. He loves being in Detroit. So, Andre making a comment and knowingly making that comment that it's going to generate some buzz. And you have to wonder, was that a play out of a Blake Griffin playbook? Just say something to get the people going? Or do you think Andre really meant it when he's like, I will be a free agent next summer?
Yeah, I mean, first off, the decision to say those words is very, very intentional. I think athletes very much so understand that what they say will get talked about in the media, on social media, on all these different platforms. So I think Drummond doing that and saying that, he knew very much well what he was stirring up. And to be honest, you don't see a player come out and say when they have an option at the end of the next season, you usually don't see a year in advance saying, I'm going to be a free agent. I'm going to have that process of having other teams trying to sign me other than the Pistons. You just don't see that. So Drummond came out and practically just said it. And to be honest, he was kind of alluding to that back in July at Summer League when he was being interviewed at all the Pistons Summer League games. he kept talking about free agency and how it's going to be a big year for him and it's a big opportunity. But he never really said, I'm going to be a free agent. When he says that, he's very much so saying that he's going to decline that player option and he's going to enter free agency as an unrestricted free agent. Now, this will be the first time in his career that he's ever had that opportunity. He's been in free agency once, and it was as a restricted free agent when he quickly re-signed with Detroit. Now, there's no restrictions. The Pistons cannot match any offer that a team throws at him, and he accepts it. If Atlanta throws a max contract at Andre Drummond, and Drummond accepts it, the Pistons can't say, well, we're going to match that offer, and you're going to continue to be a Piston. If he accepts an offer somewhere else, he's gone.
Yep.
He's gone. So this is him saying, I'm taking this opportunity. I'm going to talk to other teams next year. And, he also said, I love it in Detroit. This is not me saying I'm leaving Detroit. But he's going in very open-minded. And I was more so shocked with him saying this in a year in advance than the decision to decline the player option.
I think, we've talked about it on the podcast before, and I think there might even be an expectation on our end that he will decline the player option. But you look at Dre, and I think one of the reasons he's saying this is partially because he might love Detroit, but he also knows that he is criticized heavily in Detroit. And if this season is just an average season for him, right? And I'm not saying bad, I'm not saying great, just an average season for him. Could that be enough reason alone with the criticism he receives from the fans here in Detroit to just say, you know what? I need a fresh start. I need a new fan base. I need a different crowd of people that will appreciate what I bring to the table. Because I really think there's a balance in Detroit amongst Pistons fans. There is the segment of people who completely underappreciate what Andre Drummond brings to the floor every night. The fact that he will bring you 15 rebounds a night. And even once he doesn't grab, he brings a presence that other guys get. So, the impact he has on the glass, even if it's not all on his stat sheet, is there. You can't deny it. And, over the course of the second half of last season, Dre was a much better just overall player for the Pistons on both ends of the floor. But you also can't deny that Dre at times, has mentally checked out, that Dre at times will miss, some puppies, that Dre at times will, maybe not make the full effort he needed to make to go for a couple boards, a big play here and there. And he's also a defensive liability on the perimeter. So there are downsides to him as well. And he's getting paid a lot of money. And you have to, I guess, evaluate the value he brings to the floor at his time during games. Point being, there might be another crowd that appreciates Dre and what he can do more because they've been lacking it. Because they get out-rebounded night in, night out. They don't have a rim protector in the slightest. They are looking for a center. And somebody's going to offer him some money. Dre is going to have opportunities to leave Detroit. And I don't blame him one bit for exploring those options. Not one.
No, and the thing is, Drummond is asked to do a lot for Detroit. There's Blake Griffin, and then there's Andre Drummond. There are going to be other teams where he will be given the opportunity to not have as large of a role and as large of a burden, so that in a not much of a smaller role, but a less of a burden role, he will shine and he will really dominate. So unless the Pistons get another big name, if they get another near all-star level player, or if Luke Kennard becomes a top-level scorer, or someone else emerges, Drummond is asked to do so much on both ends of the court. He's got to be their leading rebounder. He's got to be at times their entire defense with his presence, as he plays that drop back defense and has to cover up all the other mistakes the perimeter defense makes. But on offense, they run their offense through him at times, whether it be the pick and roll between him and Reggie or between him and Blake, whether he's working with the dribble handoffs. Drummond is asked to do a lot, and the Pistons don't have or at least didn't have last year, a ton of scorers around him to help alleviate some of that pressure. Yes, Blake Griffin was great. Yes, Reggie Jackson had a very good second half of the season. Yes, Luke Kennard had a nice hot month or two streak. But consistently, the Pistons did not have enough scoring around him. And when you're asking Drummond to score 16 points a game, on top of getting you 16, 17 rebounds, on top of getting you 2 steals and 2 blocks and 2 assists per game, when you're asking him to do all of that, you're putting him in a bad situation. You're putting him in a situation where he's going to tire himself out.
Right. Well, it's also one of those things that Dre's not a superstar. He's not. He might be a max player in the league. Doesn't mean he's a superstar. And he has to play that role here. He has to play the role as one of the top guys. That's why he's gotten so much criticism, though. Because Detroit has looked at it as, hey, we've given a max contract to him. We've invested in him as one of our top guys. And, you know, he has a ceiling. He's at his ceiling. And we expect more because of him being labeled one of our quote-unquote superstars. And I think that if he doesn't have that tag elsewhere and he goes and he is a third piece as a complimentary, like, high-level guy with 2 other all-stars, then sure, Dre can flourish. Absolutely flourish because the pressure's off. But here the pressure's on. Here the pressure is on Andre Drummond to make a significant impact every night. And I got to tell you, just because you were flirting with it earlier, Dre in Atlanta would actually be a pretty interesting fit with Trae Young and the core they have going there. Man, that could be an intriguing offer. I'm not even going to lie to you.
Well, they'll be one of those teams that has some money, and that's a position there they could look to upgrade at over Dwayne Dedmon. But I think the thing with Drummond is he's been great in Detroit. You know, he's been a very good player, but the Pistons have also seen...
Has he? Has he been great in Detroit? I think that's a strong statement. I'm not saying he's been bad. Don't get me wrong. Has he been great?
Okay, maybe he hasn't been great.
Okay.
He was great the second half of the season.
Yeah, I will give you that. But I look at his tenure.
He has been good. He's been successful in Detroit. And at times he's been great.
Well, I'm just asking to play devil's advocate. What's your definition of successful?
League-leading rebounder. He's improved every season on both ends of the court. Has been the only player in the league to average over a block and over a steal per game in the front court. Just he's done a lot. He's improved his free throws. He's gone away from being just a post-up kind of center where he wasn't great to being able to help initiate an offense and in being part of one of the more successful pick-and-roll duos in the league. He is a 2-time All-Star, the best rebounder in the game, and has grown a lot on the defensive end of the floor.
I'm just going to ask, he's been, 8 years now in the league?
7.
7 years in the league, going into 8. How many playoff wins?
You can't put that all on him.
To me, it's like, I think Andre has been good in Detroit, but I don't know if I would say Andre's been successful in Detroit. Because I look at those as different things. I think what you just described as he was good.
He has been successful. He has been good. I don't know if he's been successful. Maybe the team hasn't been successful. That's not on Drummond.
It's not on Drummond. I'm not blaming it entirely on Drummond.
2 seasons. Brandon Jennings has gone down. Josh Smith was a bust. That's not on Andre Drummond. Andre Drummond has been consistently good. He's made it to the All-Star game twice. He's improved every single year he's been in the league.
I don't agree with everything you just said. I think, yeah, you're right. It's not entirely on Andre. I'm not saying it's pinpointed Andre. But what level do we see Andre Drummond at? And depending how high Andre is viewed and rated in this league, then, you have to look at that as at least partially an aspect. I didn't ask you series wins. I didn't ask you Eastern Conference Finals. All I asked was playoff wins. And to be honest, Detroit's made the playoffs twice in his 7 years. And were those both of his All-Star years, by the way?
No.
That they made it? The one wasn't, it was not an All-Star this year,
so.
Obviously, right?
No,
or he wasn't an All-Star this year. That's right. Anyways, if he would have had his second half of the season in the first half, he would have been. To me, I think Andre's been good. I don't know if he's been successful. Because to me, if you ever want to put out there successful, you have to attribute that to some sort of success in the win column.
That's just a fundamental difference in how we view success then, because I would never put it all on one player. when the Pistons have not put out a successful product around him. That's not Andre Drummond's
But there have
fault.
been times that the Pistons could have been better if he had been better, which would have made them more successful.
Okay, he's not a superstar. You said that, and I agree with that. He's not able to do everything. That doesn't mean he's not successful.
So then at what level is he at?
He's not. He's just not a superstar. He's a good player. He's an all-star level player. He's made an all-star team twice. It's not his fault that the Pistons have not put together a capable roster around him.
Right, but I'm just saying I don't think Andre has... Pistons have not...
Hey, let's put it this way. LeBron James, is he not a successful player because the Lakers didn't make the playoffs last year?
I would say so far as a Laker, LeBron James has not been successful. But in fairness, LeBron James did not even play in half of the season last year due to injury. So that's not an entirely fair question. If LeBron had played all last year and they did not win a playoff game, no. If they didn't make it to the conference finals, I would have said it wasn't a successful season.
So Bradley Beal wasn't successful last year, even though he had a career year for himself.
He had a good year. He had a great year, but he was not successful. He didn't win anything.
Then that's just a fundamental disagreement on how we view success.
We just have a different definition of success.
Yeah,
I think Bradley Beal has been
your
good.
view is wrong and my view is right.
That is totally ridiculous and preposterous, but we'll move on from that.
Bottom line, Drummond's going to have suitors in the offseason.
That is true.
And how he plays this upcoming year will very much dictate his value, because I'm not sure if there's a team that's going to throw max money at Andre Drummond. I'm not sure there's going to be. I understand teams will have money, but I think teams are getting smarter with how they spend money. And I don't think, unless Drummond really takes another step, which he's capable of, but it would have to be a rather big step for me to be comfortable giving him max money. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think there will be teams that give him a lot of money. I think the number being talked about right now on Pistons Twitter is like 28, 29 million. I can see teams getting close to that.
Well, here's the thing. You have to have one of two things in this league to be, an elite team. You are a competitive team. You have to have an elite wing, whether it's a 2 or 3, and you have to have one elite person with them, right? So if you have an elite wing, maybe you have an elite point guard. Maybe you have an elite point guard and shooting guard like Steph and Clay in Golden State pre-Kevin Durant. Or you look at Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum. Why has Portland been so good? They have 2 elite guards. The problem is you look at teams across the league, very few have an elite piece as a center. Sometimes you get a stretch 4 that's elite. You get a point guard that's elite. You have a wing that's elite. Centers are not the cream of the crop in the NBA anymore, as I think most NBA followers know. You can get away with an athletic center that doesn't do a whole ton for you on the offensive end, can protect the rim, grab some rebounds. You can get away with that if you can build up your perimeter in this league. So if I'm a team investing in a center, it's really tough for me to throw max money unless if the timing would work out with young guards on contract, that you could run it for 3 years before going into the luxury tax or things of that nature. That's why Atlanta might be a good fit. They could afford to bring Andre on a 3 or 4 year deal and see what happens before they have to, give Trae Young his payday and start building that roster a little bit. And we'll obviously have a lot of discussions going forward about Andre and him coming back to Detroit and what Detroit should offer him, and is he a max player? That's going to be a conversation all year long. But let's just turn back to the original point. Andre Drummond states that he's going to be a free agent next year, then kind of recanters and goes, well, I'm going to enjoy the process and I'm going to explore it, and I love Detroit, and I'm not saying I'm leaving. I see that as a save. I see that as a rebound, and I really do think Andre is going to be smart, because here's the other thing. If he accepts the player option, that's fine, but he takes a big risk on himself that, hey, if he has a bad year in that final season or he gets hurt, that could severely hurt him financially. And yes, he would get a nice pay for that last year, but he could financially secure himself for 3 or 4 more years by opting out and taking a new contract before you run that risk of any potential injury, setbacks, just decrease in play, whatever the case may be. So I fully expect him to opt out, and I think Dre's going to be smart here, and he's going to have the right people telling him that don't be silly about this. Opt out, financially secure yourself. Hopefully you can keep going, but if something changes, if you do have any health issues, things of that nature, you've got the opportunity to keep playing, to financially secure yourself for life after basketball.
Do you think he signs an extension with the Pistons next summer?
I mean, right now, today, that's a tough question because I think it depends on the status of the team going forward. If Detroit trades Reggie Jackson, moves a few pieces, gets younger, looks like they are going to, accept being a middle-of-the-road to end-of-the-road team for another 2 years to let some younger pieces develop, accumulate another draft pick or two, and then go for it, I could see Dre looking elsewhere. But I think the bigger question, honestly, is does Dre even get to that point where he has a chance to sign with Detroit? Or do they shop Dre at the deadline? Because with an understanding now that Dre will likely opt out, I think that's I don't care what he said, if I am the Pistons front office and looking at this, is Dre is going to likely opt out. We do not want to get nothing for him. They're going to shop him. Maybe not trade him, but they're going to shop him.
So based on what you think will happen, will Andre Drummond be a Piston next year? I need an answer.
If they make roster moves, no.
Just no. What do you think will happen? Just give me. Is Drummond going to be a Piston next year? Based on what you think,
and this is what I'm telling you.
I don't want your caveat of if they make roster.
I think moves. Put it this way: Reggie Jackson's on the roster, Andre comes back. Reggie Jackson's not on the roster, Andre leaves. That's my prediction.
Okay, I think Drummond will remain a Piston. I think they're going to end up signing an extension. That's just how I feel about it right now. Drummond likes Detroit. He really has embraced the city. I think that for as many people that spew their nonsense about Drummond, there's a lot of people that let it be known how they feel that Drummond's a very good player. And I think you're going to get that really in any city. You're going to get that this guy's good, this guy's bad, back and forth. So I don't know how much impact that really has on a decision. But the Pistons and Drummond have had a very good relationship. Drummond has had his whole career here. I think that Drummond will be a Piston come next year.
Fair enough. Well, we know who's not going to be a Piston next year, and that is Caris Levert signing an extension with the Brooklyn Nets. For Caris, chooses winning over maybe a more lucrative deal in free agency. You can't blame him at all, though. He's a guy that he's really been an up-and-comer over the past, really season, 2 seasons. He's really developed, and a lot expected a big payday for him in free agency next summer. But guess what? He decides that he wants to win. He wants to play with Durant. He wants to play with Irving. And now Irving, Durant, and Kyrie, Durant, and Caris, as your first 3 in the lineup, like that's pretty big for Brooklyn. Obviously, KD out with the injuries now, but you have to look towards the future. And of course, this was a guy that Detroit, was at least in conversations about, hey, maybe Detroit makes a play on Caris Levert. That's the wing they add to the roster. That's the guy that you take the next step with.
Yeah, we talked about that as being a possibility before on the podcast, and I actually wrote about it this week on PalacesOfPistons.com after the news broke that Levert re-signed with Brooklyn. But that's a very tough move for Detroit, who I think a lot of people, myself included, were anticipating targeting Levert, because when you looked at the restricted free agent market, he seemed like that guy that could be pried away from a team where a team wouldn't match that contract. When you look at Brooklyn's pay scale, they have Irving and Durant on max deals. I think Durant's a little bit off on a max deal, but he's right up there. And then they're paying DeAndre Jordan $10 million a year. They have that Spencer Dinwiddie extension kicking in. They're going to have Jarrett Allen coming off who they're going to have to re-sign soon. So they have and are going to continue to have a lot of money committed to different guys. Joe Harris is making $7 million a year, so they have money tied up elsewhere. And Levert being a 3, he can play the 2, yes, and he handles the ball a lot for a wing, but already having your 3 in Kevin Durant, it just kind of seemed like if Brooklyn was going to try to cut costs somewhere, maybe try to bring in another all-star or proven veteran alongside Irving and Durant, that they would let Levert walk if his price got too high. And I thought the Pistons would have been an excellent match with the potential for Drummond to opt out. They're going to have money with Drummond opting out, Reggie Jackson coming off the books, Langston Galloway coming off the books. Thon Maker will be a restricted free agent, so they could potentially have no money tied up in him. Josh Smith's over $5 million of dead salary cap space that they're still paying him. That comes off the books, so the Pistons will have some money to spend. And Levert was one of those guys that was at the top of the list in targets.
Caris Levert, Joe Harris for Andre Drummond.
Ooh. Brooklyn has no need for that.
Yeah, you have Jarrett Allen.
You have Jarrett Allen and DeAndre Jordan. They just don't really have a need for it.
Caris Levert, Jarrett Allen for Andre Drummond.
I don't know.
Now you don't have to commit money to Allen, and you move Caris Levert off the books.
I doubt Brooklyn does that. I think they view, even though the way that they've handled Jarrett Allen this summer and
the fact they played in Summer League still pisses me off.
Oh yeah, that and signing DeAndre Jordan to all that money, and Jordan's a guy that thinks he's a starter in the league, and people around the league very much so respect him, even though his game has dropped off. Allen is going to have to compete for that starting spot. So I don't think Brooklyn would make that trade, just because I still believe that they view Allen very highly, and obviously they very much so like Levert. But, oh man, I just think Levert would have been a great piece in Detroit. Would have fit very well next to Blake with Levert's ability to handle the ball, pass the basketball. Obviously, he can score from inside out, even though his shooting percentages are not the greatest. I really think those don't do him justice as a shooter. I think that, quite frankly, he's just a better shooter than that. And whether it's because of the injuries or, the role he's been in, he didn't play with a very efficient offense in Brooklyn. There was a pretty big burden on him, and there were times when D'Angelo Russell was on, and there were also times when D'Angelo Russell was very off. And then it was up to Caris Levert to be the guy, and I don't think the shooting numbers do him justice. He's always had a good shooting stroke, a shooting form. He shot the ball well at Michigan. So he's a better three-point shooter than the percentages he's shot in the NBA really tell. And then defensively, he is a very, very good prospect on that side of the court, just with his size and his IQ. Knows how to use his body, can defend multiple positions, just would have fit very well on the wing, and the kind of guy you would have liked to plug alongside Blake Griffin had the opportunity been there to do so. So it's very unfortunate for Detroit, and if you want my full thoughts on it, I wrote about it on palaceofpistons.com. You can find it on there. Just look that up. And Levert's, re-signing with Brooklyn kind of just shows the wary path Detroit has next summer in free agency, because we don't know what's going to happen with Drummond, and a lot of people had Levert at the top of the Pistons wish list. Do they continue to look at the restricted free agent market now with guys like Jaylen Brown, DeJounte Murray, Buddy Hield, all those guys going to be restricted free agents? Do they look to try to pry one of those guys away from their respective teams, or do they look at the unrestricted free agent market? Do they look at a DeMar DeRozan or a Kyle Lowry? Outside of those two guys and maybe a few others here and there, there's just not a lot of move-the-needle talent, all-star level talent out there. So it's going to be tricky for Detroit in their first season, where it sounds like they're going to have some money to really make a move that's going to help this team compete. So unfortunate with Levert, and it just kind of helps enlighten us as to why it's going to be tough for the Pistons to make any big-time plays next offseason.
Well, and you have to wonder, too, does this have any effect on Andre coming back? And I know they're not the same position, but if you think through it, next year, if you would have had to offer, Caris Levert a lucrative deal, you have to offer Andre a lucrative deal. Yes, you have money, but if you're Detroit, do you invest that money in both guys? Do you go with Caris Levert and maybe try to invest in other areas, upgrading a point guard, whatever the case may be? So with him not being available and maybe less options on the market next year, that is something that maybe could create it being a more likely scenario that Detroit pushes harder to bring back Andre Drummond.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I think the Pistons are going to try to remain contenders. I don't really think they're all too interested in blowing it up. They want to improve the roster any way they can and get closer and closer to competing as far as they can. So, that's one of those scenarios where if Detroit doesn't get the person they really want and they have the opportunity to bring back Drummond, and maybe Drummond is the person that they really want to bring back, but if there's someone else that they do want and aren't able to get, that's why I predicted Drummond's going to be a Piston going into the 2020-2021 season. I just think that the Pistons want to compete. Tom Gores is not strayed away from that vision. Every time he talks about believing and empowering the front office into making this team a competitor and a winner. So I think they're going to, unless something changes this season and the Pistons are just awful, and for some reason they cannot put together wins and be a playoff team, then maybe they will blow it up. But all signs point to this team really working to compete and try to win as many games as they can. And if they have to change the roster to do so, then they'll change the roster to do so.
Well, throughout his career, some critics have said, well, hopefully Andre Drummond can get to Dwight Howard level. And, well, Dwight Howard has signed a non-guaranteed deal with the Los Angeles Lakers. So I guess the question's out there now. One, is Dwight now trying to get back to Andre Drummond level? One. And two, let's be honest. How about and this has been going on for years, but just the fall of Dwight Howard. And I think something for fans of the NBA through the early and mid-2000s. Aaron, you and I grew up with Dwight Howard as Superman, with Carmelo Anthony as, that all-star that was like, when's he going to catch his break? When's he going to win? When's he going to take that next step in that department? But you watch two guys that were all-stars, that were top-level NBA guys, that have been severely humbled by the NBA here in the last few years, and it's just kind of crazy to see guys that we grew up watching and following close. And I remember Dwight Howard in the Superman cape. I remember Melo back on the Nuggets. Like, it's kind of crazy to see the progression and degression of both of these guys.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because both of those guys were very good players in their prime. Carmelo, arguably one of the best scorers ever in his prime. Just the way he was able to put the ball in the basket, unparalleled to most players in the league's history. And then Dwight, arguably one of the more dominant centers of all time, probably the best center of the 2000 to 2010 decade. Just an absolute monster inside, both scoring and rebounding, an elite defensive player in his prime in Orlando. That's a guy that almost won a championship over beating LeBron James with Cleveland, and with an Orlando team that quite frankly wasn't as good as some of the other teams in the league, but Dwight Howard was that good that the surrounding amount of talent, even though it was still good, but again, not as good as other teams.
Jameer Nelson.
Jameer Nelson, Hedo Turkoglu, Rashard Lewis.
That was a squad.
Michael Petrus.
It was a squad, bro.
But, those are two guys that really were amazing players in their prime. And I think Howard is going to be an interesting player for the Lakers because I still think he can be productive. but it's, especially in the last few years, it's about what's his mentality.
By the way, how did we not say Vince Carter in that conversation? Short-term stint on the Orlando Magic. That included the 2009 season, though, when they made the NBA Finals. Another very important piece on that team.
Yeah, I mean, they always had an interesting group of talent, but, I mean, both of those guys, Carmelo and Dwight, never winning a ring, and they're falling off has really both been about mentality and maturity. Carmelo's unwillingness to take a step back in terms of what his role is and not being a guy that's going to get 15 to 20 shots per game. And Howard, just his off-the-court issues, his meshing in the locker room. He's had his issues with Kobe and James Harden and hasn't ever been, at least recently, been a guy that...
Stan Van Gundy.
Yeah, I mean, he's just never really been a guy that's not going to cause an issue. And he says this fresh start is a change to that. But I think he said that before. And
What did
we'll
he say
have
when
to
he went
see.
to, like, Washington?
Right.
You know?
In Atlanta. I mean, in Charlotte. You know, every year it's a great new start for me. It's a new chapter. I've matured. It's going to be different. Is it really going to be different? Because for the Lakers, they got to be hoping and praying that it is.
Well, especially with Boogie Cousins now looking like he's not going to be around very much.
No, not because of his injury and because of some very severe comments that will probably bar him from the NBA for the rest of his life. But Howard's a guy that the Lakers really need, and that's kind of scary to say that in 2019 because last season he played in just 9 games, and he was fine, but he only was able to stay healthy for 9 games. This is a guy that's getting up there in age, has had his issues in the locker room, and just quite frankly isn't the caliber player that he once was. You know he's going to miss games because of injuries, and you're worried about what he's going to do in the locker room, and you're worried about what kind of issues he's going to have on the court. Can he defend at a successful enough level? He's not going to be able to stop guys when he's dragged out onto the perimeter, but can he alter shots at the rim? Is he going to rebound? Can he just finish the easy stuff inside? If he can do those things, he'll be a valuable piece. He'll be a valuable player for them, maybe even good enough to start over JaVale McGee. But those are all big ifs at this point in Dwight Howard's career, and I'm sincerely worried about that for the Lakers because they really need him if this team is going to win. And they have every expectation that they're going to win with 2 of the top 5, top 6 players in the league, and LeBron James and Anthony Davis. I mean, you can't have anything lower than championship expectations and aspirations with a team that good.
Yeah, even though they don't have the depth.
They don't have the depth, which is why a guy like Dwight Howard stepping up and being somewhat revitalized, having a revitalized season would be huge for them. I mean, you look at the rest of that roster, and Danny Green's a good player. He'll help out. Kyle Kuzma's all right. I think he's a nice guy to have off the bench as a scorer, but he still has a long way to go. There's a lot of people that really overrate the level of player Kyle Kuzma is right now. He's still young and is not developed enough. And then there are the people that say, oh, Kyle Kuzma's terrible. And it's like, there's that happy medium. It's kind of the same thing with Andre Drummond. Some say he's great, some say he's bad. There's a happy medium there. And then you look at the rest of their team, Rajon Rondo, Alex Caruso, Quinn Cook as the point guards. I don't like Rajon Rondo very much at this point in his career. I think Caruso's solid. Quinn Cook's okay.
LeBron playing point guard?
Yeah, LeBron will play some point guard. They'll be okay. I mean, they'll be okay with their depth, but at the end of the day, and we see it in the playoffs, it's the stars that matter. And the Lakers have 2 of the top 6 players in the league, and that's going to bode very well for them. As long as they're getting a little bit of production from guys like Danny Green, who I think are locks to help out. Kuzma can help out. One of JaVale or Dwight will work. I think JaVale has honestly become a very useful player just for what he can do. So they have some other contributors. And I think having arguably the best player in the world still in LeBron, and then Anthony Davis, another elite player, they'll be fine. But the not having the depth is going to hurt them in the regular season. If LeBron or AD, both guys that we know can miss time, if they miss time, that's going to have a factor. Do they have enough depth to still be competitive and win games in a Western Conference where there's no nights off? You have to win to stay in the playoffs. And does Kyle Kuzma and Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee and Rajon Rondo and Danny Green, is that enough? I don't really think so. So there's a lot of pressure on LeBron and AD to stay as healthy as possible, and you can't really put that pressure on them because injuries are just something that happens. It's not something you can really say, we need you to stay healthy this year. Of course you need to stay healthy. So it'll be interesting. But Howard being a contributor for them is going to be really interesting because it's kind of now or never for him. This is probably going to be his last ride in terms of being a useful player. And in terms of saving his career, he needs to have a good season. And in terms of the Lakers' success, he needs to have a good season.
Yeah, no doubt. So see if D12 can get himself to Andre Drummond level this year, and I guess that would start with even just making the NBA roster and getting himself a guaranteed deal. But I mean, hey, Andre, he's going to be a free agent next summer, per his direct quote. Caris Levert not going to be a free agent next summer. He is staying put in Brooklyn. And while Dwight Howard, he may be a free agent in 30 days. So I guess we will just have to wait and see what happens for each one of those guys. But that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Before you go, make sure you like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you check out our YouTube channel. A lot of great video content going up there. The website, of course, palaceofpistons.com. On Twitter, you can follow Aaron at AJohnsonNBA, myself at Media Brendan. And hey, why not? Ryan had a work commitment, wasn't able to be with us this week, but throw him a follow at Ryan Pay. We look forward to having him back on the air with us next week. Of course, on Twitter, at Palace of Pistons, where we got the Facebook page going, so find the Palace of Pistons on Facebook as well. Instagram, it's at Palace Pistons, so you can connect with us on a variety of platforms. Check out that website, check out that YouTube channel. Hope you enjoy the pod, and we look forward to being with you again next week on another edition of the Palace Pistons Podcast.